So ever feel like you're just drowning in information? You read something really interesting, maybe for work, maybe just 'cause, and then a week later it's kind of fuzzy.
Oh, absolutely. It's like pouring water into a leaky bucket sometimes.
Yeah. So today we're going to tackle that head on. We've got these sources, a research paper on learning, an article on memory tricks, and the mission is, well, to give you a system, not for remembering everything, but for remembering what actually counts.
That's the key, isn't it? We get so hung up on consumption,
Yeah.
how much we can read or watch,
Right.
but we often forget the digestion part. How do we make it stick? How do we actually use it later? It's more about what stays than just what goes in.
And, that whole idea of needing to remember everything, it makes me think of Kim Peek, the
Yeah.
mega genius.
Yes, incredible story. The man could read a book, both pages at once, I think, and remember it basically word for word.
Exactly. And give you pinpoint directions between any two U.S. cities just from memory. It's mind-boggling.
Truly remarkable. But it's important to understand why. He had a very rare brain condition, right? Macrocephaly, missing the corpus callosum.
Yeah, the bit connecting the two brain halves.
And the theory is his brain basically rewired itself in some extraordinary ways, leading to that phenomenal recall.
Okay, so here's a thought experiment. You've got an exam coming up based on, say, our sources today. Who does better, you or Kim Peek?
Hmm. Well, it seems obvious at first, right? He'd recall every single word.
But
But Kim Peek actually struggled quite a bit with reasoning, with abstract thought, with problem solving. He could recite facts, but understanding the concepts in that research paper or figuring out how to apply the memory techniques in the article, that was much harder for him.
So for most of us listening, the goal isn't just raw recall. It's using that information right for thinking, for solving problems.
Precisely. You'd likely do better on an exam that requires understanding and application because that's what your brain is optimized for. So the aim isn't Kim Peek's level of recall.
It's more achievable.
It's remembering what you need to remember to actually do something with the knowledge, building that usable working knowledge base.
Okay, so how do we do that? You mentioned a system.
Yeah, a framework. We're calling it PACER, P-A-C-E-R. It's a way to think about the type of information you're encountering in, say, that research paper or article.
Because not all information is created equal.
Exactly. The steps for a technique need a different approach than the underlying theory. Identifying the type first helps you process it effectively.
And if you use the wrong process, like trying to memorize steps instead of practicing them.
Well, you'll probably struggle to remember it. It'll feel like wading through mud, take way longer than it should, and you might just end up passively skimming without anything really sinking in.
Okay, so PACER helps avoid that. It's two stages then. Identify the type while reading,
That's the consumption part, yeah.
and then use a specific digestion process for that type.
Exactly, to encode it properly. So let's start with P, procedural.
Procedural.
Yeah.
So the how-to stuff.
Precisely. How something should be done. Like clinical examination steps in a medical text, maybe coding instructions, or learning a language grammar rule. It's the execution.
Or in our memory article, the actual steps for using a memory technique.
Perfect example. That's procedural.
So what's the targeted process for that? How do you digest procedural info?
It's simple, but crucial. Practice.
Just do it.
Just do it as soon as possible after you read it. If the article explains a visualization technique, you need to actually try visualizing something using that technique.
Don't just nod along thinking, yeah, I get it.
Right? Because you probably don't fully get it until you try. Delaying that practice means you start forgetting the nuances, the little steps, and then you have to go back. It's inefficient.
But what if you can't practice right away? Like the research paper describes a complex experimental setup you can't just replicate at your desk.
That's a common challenge, and it highlights this balance we need between consumption and digestion. Learning really clicks when you follow reading with some kind of active processing.
So maybe not full practice, but something else.
Yeah, maybe mentally rehearse the steps, visualize yourself doing it, or even just quickly jot down the key stages from memory. The point is to avoid just overeating information.
Overeating, like binge reading without stopping to digest.
Exactly. If you just keep stuffing procedural info in without practicing or actively processing, you end up with, well, mental vomiting.
Yeah.
You forget most of it.
Not pleasant.
Some studies suggest we can forget up to like 90% of what we consume if we're purely passive about it.
90%, wow. So spending maybe a bit less time reading and more time practicing or processing actually leads to remembering more.
Definitely. You build a stronger working knowledge that way, less quantity consumed, but much higher quality retained.
Okay, so for procedural, Practice, practice, practice. Or at
Got
least
it.
actively process. Got it. What's next? A.
A is for analogous. This is information that relates or connects to something you already know. Prior knowledge.
So, like, when the research paper compares a new learning theory to an older one I've heard of.
Exactly. Or maybe the memory article uses a metaphor you understand to explain a complex mnemonic. It's that, oh, this is kind of like that other thing feeling.
So while I'm reading, I should be actively looking for those connections.
Yes. And when you find one, the targeted process isn't just noticing it, it's critique.
Critique. Like, judge it.
Sort of. But it's not about being negative. It's about examining how good the analogy actually is. Don't just accept it passively. Ask questions.
Okay, so how do I critique an analogy? If the article says memory is like a muscle.
You'd first identify the similarities they're pointing out, maybe that it gets stronger with use.
Right.
Then, crucially, you look for the differences. Where does the analogy break down? In what ways is memory not like a muscle? Can a memory get strained? Does rest work the same way?
Okay, so you're testing the boundaries of the comparison.
Precisely. You're looking at where it holds up and where it doesn't. Doing that forces you to think much more deeply about the new concept the analogy is trying to explain.
And that deeper thinking helps it stick.
Absolutely. It helps you integrate the new information into your existing mental frameworks, your neural networks, in a much more robust way. Studies consistently show creating and analyzing analogies boosts retention and understanding.
Makes sense. It's active engagement again. Okay, PA. Next is C. Conceptual.
Conceptual information. This is the what? Facts, explanations, theories, principles, the relationships between ideas, how things apply.
So in our sources, the research paper would be heavy on this. The theories of learning, the principles behind them.
Definitely. Most science subjects involve a lot of conceptual learning. Even with procedural knowledge, you need conceptual understanding.
Right.
Like, you might know the procedure for listening to a heartbeat.
The how-to.
But you also need the conceptual knowledge of what a normal heartbeat is supposed to sound like to know if something's wrong.
Gotcha. So how do we best digest these core concepts?
The targeted process here is mapping. Think mind maps, concept maps, nonlinear network-based notes.
Mapping. So not just writing bullet points.
Right. Mapping forces you to pay closer attention and really grapple with how the concepts connect. Expert knowledge isn't stored linearly in the brain. It's a web, a network.
So mapping helps you recreate that expert network for yourself.
Exactly. As you read about, say, different learning models in the research paper, you start drawing connections. How does this model relate to that one? Does this principle underpin that theory? You're actively constructing the relationships.
So you literally pause while reading the paper and start drawing a map, on paper or digitally.
Yep. Take the time. Add concepts, draw lines, maybe add little notes on the connections. You probably rearrange it as you learn more. And remember those analogies we talked about.
Yeah.
You can add those to your map too, maybe with a little note about your critique, the strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, but again, what if I'm in the flow reading a dense part of the paper? Stopping a map might feel disruptive.
It's that balance thing again. You have to find time for digestion. Maybe read a chunk, then pause and map the key ideas from that section before moving on.
Better than just powering through.
Much better. If you just consume dense conceptual stuff without mapping or processing the connections, you risk overwhelming yourself. It just becomes a jumble of facts later, and you'll have created more work trying to untangle it. Slow down to speed up comprehension.
Slow down to speed up. I like that. Okay, PAC brings us to E. Evidence.
Evidence. These are the details that make the conceptual stuff more concrete. Facts, statistics, findings from studies, specific cases or examples.
So in the research paper, this would be the actual data from the experiments they ran, or the results they cite from other studies.
Exactly. Or in the memory article, maybe they cite a statistic about how much forgetting happens without active recall. That stat is evidence supporting the conceptual point about active recall being important.
Okay, so it's the stuff that backs up the main ideas. How do we handle evidence?
The process is store and rehearse.
Store and rehearse. Sounds straightforward.
It is, mostly. Store means capture it when you see it. Note down the key statistic, the main finding of that study. Maybe add it as a supporting point on your concept map, or put it in a notes app, whatever system you use.
But don't try to memorize it on the spot.
Not necessarily, no. Don't get bogged down. Just capture it efficiently.
And then rehearse. When does that happen?
That comes a bit later, often after you feel you've got a decent handle on the main concepts, the C. Rehearsal here means thinking about how that evidence supports the point.
So actively thinking. Okay, how does the study result actually demonstrate that learning principle from the paper?
Precisely. Or how can I use this statistic from the memory article to explain why spaced repetition works? You might apply it, solve problems with it, explain it to someone, write about it. It's about connecting the evidence back to the concepts actively.
So you're not just memorizing the fact, but understanding its role and how to use it.
Exactly. The priority, especially during the first pass reading your sources, should be getting the P, A, and C down. Those form the foundation. Store the evidence as you go, but rehearse its connection later.
Build the skeleton, then add the muscle later. Got it. Last one. R for reference.
Reference information.
Mm-hmm.
This is the really specific, granular stuff. Details that, honestly, probably won't change your core understanding much if you forget them, but you might need to look them up later.
Right.
The exact value of a specific constant mentioned in the paper, a particular gene name, a long list of minor attributes, maybe a specific citation for another paper they mentioned briefly.
Okay, stuff that's good to know where to find, but maybe not essential to hold in your head all the time.
Exactly. And the process, again, is store and rehearse. Storing is the same noted down efficiently, put the citation in your bibliography manager, save the specific value somewhere accessible.
And the rehearsal part, is it different from evidence rehearsal?
Slightly. For reference info, rehearsal is often just about direct recall if you actually need to memorize it. For instance, if you do need to know that specific gene name for an exam, then flashcards and spaced repetition systems like Anki are perfect.
Ah, so this is where tools like Anki really shine for these specific reference facts.
Yes, if memorization is the goal for that specific piece of reference info. But for much of it, the rehearsal is simply knowing you've stored it reliably and can find it quickly when needed. The main point is, don't waste precious reading time trying to actively memorize this stuff.
Right. Focus energy on the P, A, and C first.
Absolutely. That ineffective habit many people have rereading sentences over and over during consumption, trying to force memorization of minor details. It's just not efficient, especially not for reference info.
Okay, this PACER framework makes a lot of sense. Let's quickly recap for tackling those sources.
Sure.
P is procedural, the how-to, like memory exercises. The process is practice.
Yep.
A is analogous, connecting new info to old. Look for corrections, then critique them, strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
C is conceptual, the core theories and principles, like in the learning paper. The process is mapping the connections. E is evidence, the supporting facts and data. Store it efficiently, then rehearse how it supports the concepts later.
Good.
And R is reference-specific, minor details. Store it, and only rehearse via recall flashcards if necessary. Otherwise, just know where you stored it.
You got it. Balancing the consumption reading and identifying the pacer type with the right kind of digestion, the targeted process.
Okay.
That's the key to really retaining information and building useful knowledge from your sources.
It moves you from just reading passively to actively constructing understanding.
Exactly. Working smarter. And honestly, this pacer system is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to efficient learning strategies.
A great starting point, though. So for you listening, as you dive into that research paper or memory article or really anything you read next,
Try to consciously ask yourself, what kind of information is this? Is it P, A, C, E, or R?
and then think, okay, how am I going to digest this? Am I going to practice it, critique it, map it, store, and rehearse it?
Yeah. And maybe just consider this. How might consciously using this kind of framework actually change how effectively you learn from everything you read from this point forward? What could that unlock